Today, we're going to be talking about what makes a D1 wide receiver. So in this first example, we're going to take a look at this wide receiver out of Eastern Carolina University running a comeback route. And something that a lot of D1 wide receivers have in common that a lot of, I guess you could say more like beginner, intermediate wide receivers don't have is the ability to eliminate extra steps at the top of the break. So obviously when I'm running a comeback route, you guys, we want to drop my hips, right? We want to be able to drop on a dime, just like this wide receiver showcases here. I'm trying to sell vertical all the way up, like say it's a 15-yard comeback, all the way up till 15. From the start of the route to the end of the route, I want to make sure I have the same speed, the same stride, the same body language, and then I'm able to drop right on a dime, right? Now, a lot of wide receivers who are kind of more intermediate can drop on a dime, but it takes them a while to get out of the break. To be able to eliminate extra time at the top of the break, you have to do something called a pivot and hook method. So let's say you drop on your inside foot, right? That's what you would do in a perfect world when running a comeback route. Now, if it's man-to-man coverage, sometimes you get to the depth and you have to drop on your outside foot, and that's totally fine. If it's zone coverage, you generally want to be on the inside foot, and if you could get the inside foot versus man, you obviously want to do it because that's the way you can eliminate the most amount of steps or get in and out of the break in the least amount of steps. So he drops on this inside foot, and we call this a trigger step. So a trigger step is what like triggers used to slow down in a sense. That's where you want to be violent with your hips. That's where you want to try to bring your chin to your knee as quickly as possible, and you want to drop to 90 degrees. Drop your entire center of gravity. Now, the second step of this is what's going to eliminate steps. You have to pivot your foot at a 45-degree angle. So you see how his foot and his toe is pointed this way, because what that does is that starts to turn your hips down the 45-degree break. And then your third step hooks around naturally because your second step pivoted. So we have to snap, pivot, hook. And when you could pivot hook and you're low enough because you dropped your center of gravity, you could push off of that hook step and be able to separate from that DB. Because that, guys, at like a D1 level, these DBs are very, very talented. You know what I mean? They're very talented. They're great athletes. They have good technique. So we have to add extra intricacies to our game to be able to get separation and be able to win consistently on routes, like eliminating wasted steps. So a lot of guys will snap with their inside foot. Second step faces forward. Third steps forward. Fourth step, fifth step, and then they're out. And if you're getting in and out of breaks in 5 steps, okay, that's not necessarily terrible, but there is that next level that we could push to, and that's what you always want to try to strive for as a wide receiver. How can I get 1% better at the routes that I run and the breaks that I do? Now, the next thing we're going to be talking about that D1 wide receivers are able to do is have a little bit more of a complex release game and work different, like I guess you could say more advanced releases that you may not see from like a novice or an average high school wide receiver, because you're going to be faced with press coverage, you guys. It's not high school ball anymore where you're just facing zone coverage, zone coverage, zone coverage. DBs are going to walk down, they're going to play press, and you got to know what to do. And that's what we're going to be breaking down with this release. But before we get into that, fellas, if you are a wide receiver watching this video or a quarterback and you would like to train with myself and my staff of coaches, we are going to be traveling out to 15 different locations this offseason for 2-day long QB and wide receiver training camp. So guys, check out that very first link in the description below if you would like to attend. We're going to be coming out to San Francisco, Orlando, Phoenix, Charlotte, Austin, Las Vegas, Seattle, Chicago, Newark, Birmingham, Houston, Boston, Columbus, Boise, and Los Angeles, you guys. So fellas, check out that very first link in that description below. Again, we would love to have you out there. All of our camps last year sold out, and we had to turn away a lot of people. So make sure if you want to attend, sign up. Again, very first link in that description below. Let's get back to this video. So now, next thing we're going to talk about is going to be a slide release, you guys. So a slide release, I guess you could say, is a little bit more of an advanced way, or I should call it a slide crossover release. It's more of an advanced way to run a slant versus press. So a lot of times when we have press coverage and we have to run a slant, right? This DB's here is like inside leverage. What we would do is something called like a diamond release, right? This is a release that I feel every wide receiver can get down no matter what level of football you play, which is where you would take 3 hard steps at a DB's outside shoulder or outside hip. So again, 3 hard steps, 1, 2, 3, and you'd put the brakes on the third step and you would run your slant route, right? And the goal would be to get this DB to open up his hips, think we're going fade, and then we cut under him, right? Now, remember, more advanced wide receivers have more advanced ways of doing things, right? The D1 level, all these wide receivers have a little bit more complex release bag, I guess you could say, right? So what this release is going to be a slide release. So a slide release, you can start it with either kicking with your back foot or using something called like a prep step / jab step with your front foot. So you see how he jabs to the inside with this first step. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to push off of that jab step. And when he pushes off of that step, he attacks at a 45-degree angle. just like how you would attack on a diamond release. Because when you attack at a 45-degree angle, aka right past that DB's hip and right past his outside shoulder, we're forcing him to kind of make a decision, right? When we slide to the outside like this, is he going to jump to the outside and try to play the fade, or is he going to sit to the inside and play the slant? So when we slide like this to the outside and that DB kind of starts to open up, we could hit him with something called a crossover, which means you step in the direction you were going first. So you slide to the outside, you step inside because we're going to the inside. It's a slant, inside foot, outside foot. And when you step to the outside foot, we have to make sure that we are pushing off the inside foot. You are throwing your hip, aka that means your hip is attached to your foot, because when your hip goes, that's what usually makes the DB go, because that is what he is watching in press coverage, or at least a disciplined DB should be. And that's what can get him to jump and think that we're running this outside release fade and get a separation on the slant. Now, this is also great to use, guys, because look where they're at. They're in the red zone, right? So if we're in the red zone, a DB is not necessarily threatened by 3 hard steps to the outside, because he's not threatened by a deep fade because we don't have that much space back there. But he is threatened by a jump ball. And on a jump ball, usually what do receivers like to do? They like to slow the tempo and then accelerate and go up and get it. So that's what we want to make it look like. So guys, D1 wide receivers, the traits, some of the things that they have in common is that they have more advanced releases. So I recommend you guys getting down the basics if you're not at that level yet, and then progress to the more advanced stuff, because it can only help you, especially when you face press coverage, because you will face it. You never know when you're going to be in that situation, because a lot of you guys are in high school and you're thinking, I don't need to know it. All I see is zone. All I see is zone. But what happens when you go to a college camp? What happens when you're at a college camp? Guy comes down and presses, bunch of college coaches in front of you. They're looking for receivers and you don't know what to do. So you have to know these things, you guys, okay? So now, next thing that D1 wide receivers do, what they have in common is they can block. I'm telling you guys this right now, every single run play, I get it. It can be boring as a receiver. We want to catch touchdowns. I understand. But every single run play is an opportunity for a highlight. Now, this is a clip of Travis Hunter here. There are 3 keys to wide receiver blocking. Number 1 is going to be approaching the DB under control. Most important thing. A lot of receivers, when I tell them advice of like, hey, you got to block, you know what I mean? It's an opportunity for a highlight. They go, oh, okay. And then they go try to run and take this guy's head off. But the issue is that when you're running like a bat out of hell, all it takes is one quick move, and then that guy's back in the backfield making a play because he's juked you out because you're out of control. So you need to make sure that you approach him under control. Number 2, your feet got to stay active. Feet got to stay active while you're in front of him, and feet got to stay active in driving when you get hands on him. And then number 3, you guys, you got to make sure that you have a wide base, because if you get hands on him, and let's say he's a bigger physical dude, he could try to rip your hands off. He could try to just overpower you. But if you have a wide center of gravity or a wide base, I would say feet just slightly, guys, not a ton, just slightly outside of your shoulders. That's a perfect base for when you get hands. You keep your feet moving and drive this guy out of the play. So fellas, D1 level wide receivers, they have to block. They're going to expect it of you, especially at that next level. So now, next example here is going to be a clip of Tank Dell back when he was at the University of Houston. And I think the wide receiver position is changing, you guys. Like, I think it's, no longer about, speed's obviously important and size is obviously important, but I think an attribute that is getting more and more popular, especially amongst college wide receivers, because of how offenses are. Because what is every offense, you guys? Air raid, 5 wide, throw the ball, spread. You know what I mean? Like, you're not seeing too many wing T offenses where they're asking receivers to, block on 99% of the plays. You know what I mean? They're looking for guys who can run great routes. And something that they look for in guys who can run great routes is getting in and out of their breaks where they have to drop their hips. And this is something that I've heard like Ohio State talk about. Ohio State every single year recruits the top receivers. They get the top receivers every year. Same with Alabama. And they're looking for dudes who can get in and out of breaks smoothly. So let's watch what Tank Dell does here, because this is a perfect example of that. He's running a curl route, breaks on, and then he's out of this thing. So, guys, that is what we ultimately want to strive for. They're not a bunch of people that can move like Tank Dell, but we can improve at the top of the break always, right? So we talked about that first example, eliminating extra steps, but getting into the break also matters too. And I would say on every single route that you run, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is try to train your drills realistically to this situation. Like, I think a lot of receivers, they work on like dropping their hips on breaks the wrong way. Like, they'll have coaches set up like see how I set up these like little circles right here? They'll have like 6 cones and they'll have them run around, but the cones are like 3 yards away, right? So yeah, you're getting your feet around, but there's really no need for you to drop your hips. You're not building muscle memory of you having to change direction. What I do with my receivers is I'll have a start point. I'll have them start out here, and I have them take off on a full speed run, and then I'll yell drop I call it red light, green light, and they have to drop their hips and just completely decelerate because that gets them comfortable in this. Football is not played in a cone obstacle course. Football is played in open space. So when you train, you have to mimic this. I could give you all the tips all day about dropping your hips, but if you don't rep it out in a game realistic situation, you're not going to do it. So Tank Dell going into this break, guys, you got to make sure that we are dropping to a 90-degree angle. We are shooting my hips into my feet. Think of that analogy. Your hips go straight into your feet as violently as you can, and we are holding a 90-degree position with my lower body. And if you guys can do that consistently, fellas, I'm telling you right now, that is enough to impress a college coach. College coach loves a receiver who can get in and out of these 45-degree angle breaks smoothly. Now, next thing that I feel high-level D1 wide receivers have is just like a high football IQ. They know how to run routes. You know what I mean? And I think that we have a lot of receivers that obviously watch our social media on whether it's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever. And I think the receivers are getting smarter. I think that, and maybe we have a part to play in that because of how we break certain things down. But you look at top level wide receivers because like guys, at the next level, everybody's a good athlete. So you need to have something. You can't just rely on, okay, I'm bigger and faster, because the second you get on that field, there's going to be a dude lined up across from you who's just as big and just as fast. You need to have technique, and technique can only take you so far too. You have to know when to use the technique. So this is an example of Garrett Wilson when he was at Ohio State, running like kind of like a goal line fade to this back corner, right? So he's going to close the space with this DB, which means bring the line of scrimmage to him, give him a move inside, and then go. A lot of young receivers will see a DB who's lined up inside shade like this and just take off and run. But you got to remember, pre-snap, we have to have a plan based off of how this DB is aligned, right? This DB is inside leverage. That means his goal is to not let us run to the inside and force us to his help, and his help is the sideline. So if we just take off and run, we're doing his job for him. He's going to get right into my hips, squeeze me, and I'm not giving the quarterback room. So I got to threaten his leverage inside. But I can't just do that off the ball. I can't give him a jab right here where I'm drawing this X. Because if he jumps, okay, cool, but I still got to get to the back pylon and he could cut that off. So I got to go right to his toes, give him a move, and then get to the back pylon. And that's what Wilson does. Closes the space, move, and then you see the amount of space and the amount of room he gives his quarterback. You got to run quarterback-friendly routes, you guys. Because when you get to the next level, quarterback's going to be very talented. You never have to worry about a quarterback not being able to make a throw. But you have to run a friendly route, and that comes from having a high route running IQ, which I feel all wide receivers need to have at that next level.